Okay, I think we're on. All right, greetings everybody. I'm here again today with coaches Kelly and Ned Vandiver. And today we're going to talk about boundaries. We're going to talk about specifically what most people get wrong about boundaries and do a little bit of a deep dive around what that really means. Because there are some misconceptions about it, and a lot of people don't realize how many things actually come from, how many symptoms of relationship problems are about boundaries that don't seem like they are at first glance. So it's really important to get this right and recognize how crucial and fundamental boundaries are for a healthy, happy relationship. Because I think a lot of people think that boundaries is just about saying no, right? Like it's just about how to draw a line, self-care, and saying no. And that is part of it. Like that is definitely true, but that's not the whole story. And I think people tend to get the idea that if you're saying no to somebody, you're putting up a wall, you're putting up a boundary. It's about being less loving. It's about being less generous. That's what boundaries are, that I'm taking care of myself to the detriment of others. And that's actually nothing could be further from the truth. And we're going to get into that in just a moment.
Yeah, exactly.
What we're going to cover today is we're going to cover what boundaries exactly are, like what do we mean by that, and some basic definitions that we use. What do they look like? Why are they so important in the relationship? We're then going to talk about the 7 most common problems that we face as a result of having poor boundaries. Some really common things that, like I said, you might not have realized are actually connected to boundaries. And there are more than 7, but we're just going to hit on the top 7 for today. And then we're going to talk more importantly about what you can do, some mindset shifts and some decisions that you can make to ensure that you're actually operating from a place of healthy boundaries going forward. So before we get into the problem around it and what to do about it, let's just talk definitions. What are boundaries? How would we define boundaries both literally and layman terms and in relationships?
Well, for the most part, a boundary is usually a limit that you set in terms of anything that if you have a circle around yourself and you only want to be affected by a certain thing within that circle, you set up a line of defense sometimes. And, that's in layman terms, that would be considered a boundary. But when you talk about a relationship, you're talking about things that bring clarity around specific situations within your relationship in terms of maybe how you communicate with one another, So there are different things that define. It's almost defined by the people who are actually creating the boundaries, but the specific definition is it's just a limit we draw or a line we draw in the sand in terms of saying, okay, I can deal with this much, but it kind of stops right here. Okay.
Yeah,
and
our limit.
I'm going to own my part up to this line, and at that point, I'm giving you the consideration to do the same thing for me.
Yes, that is such a great point, and it makes me think of something I want to add to that later. But it is just like where we end and where another person begins, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have where we end and another person begins, and then we have also our own boundaries, right? Like where I begin and where I end within myself. And so we've got our boundaries, right, for ourselves, what we're going to say yes to, what we're going to say no to, for our own healthy self-preservation. And then we have boundaries for others, right? Situations, people that might, infringe on our boundary. So, yeah.
That's a great distinction too. It's like protective boundaries versus containing boundaries. So protective boundaries is like where we draw the line between us and another person to not let things in that are not going to be good for us.
Exactly.
Right. And then the containing boundaries is where do we stop ourselves from flowing out over the line onto others.
Right.
Through blame or some other things that we're going to talk about in just a minute.
And where is the boundary for ourselves when we are crossing a major boundary of beating up on ourselves, self-criticism, bad, talk.
Oh, I see. And that's even another level, right?
Yeah.
Within ourselves of like, we have to draw a line for our own selves in our own self-talk. Yeah, that's such a great point. I don't think most people think of that when we think of boundaries, because we do think of it as just between us and another person.
Starts with ourselves.
Yes. And I think, they're ultimately healthy boundaries are limits that keep you happy and healthy, right? What would be unhealthy boundaries? Give an example of unhealthy boundaries or no boundaries, or what we call boundaryless.
Yeah. So, I mean, one huge case or situation that I hear about in a lot of the relationships is, especially usually from the guys, is that, over time, as you develop problems within your relationship, a lot of times resentment builds, and it can
Mhm.
build on either party depending on what the situation is, but that generally creates walls, and walls that, to me, that can become an unhealthy boundary when you're talking about connection. Okay, because
Yes.
in order for you to effectively communicate, you have to maintain that connection. It's very important that stay a staple and be one of the most important things that you keep vital within a relationship. And when you begin to, that resentment begins to build that wall, a lot of times,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, we become disconnected, and then we find ourselves not being able to communicate effectively, or we start
Right.
doing other things that we used to do very well, and everything becomes an issue almost. So that's
Mm-hmm.
an example of an unhealthy boundary.
Yeah, to draw a distinction between a wall and a boundary, because a wall is like something where there's not anything coming in and out, right? There's no flow of information, there's no openness, there's no receptivity
Exactly.
where you can consider something and then make a decision
Right.
it's just saying no, unilaterally the wall is up. And
Right.
that's
Yeah.
an example of an unhealthy
Yeah.
boundary.
And that's really common. It's really common. And it really, what it does is it serves to shut others away completely. It's a very common relationship dynamic that there is a love avoidant person in the relationship. Many times it's the men, but sometimes it's the women too. I've seen it both ways.
For sure. And not being able to receive what you actually desire because you have an overly defensive boundary in place, a preemptive boundary, but it's not really a boundary, it's a wall that you're not able to receive what you deeply desire actually, but you're not able to see your own role in holding up that wall.
Right.
So
And,
not knowing what's yours and not, knowing what's yours and knowing what's not yours and what part you play is an example of a blurry boundary, right?
yeah, exactly. And what it begins to do over time, though, is really begins to harm the person, because it
Mm-hmm.
begins to stack on the emotions of, like fear, shame, guilt, because you're not receiving.
Mm-hmm.
Blocking yourself off
You're
from
not getting the messages you need to feel
you have to be fed as well as feed someone else, and when you cut that off, it's just like
healthy.
cutting off your life support.
Right.
You die as a person. So and so you begin to take on all these negative emotions, and it begins to affect your outlook.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's really unhealthy. So yeah,
And
definitely.
that's when it becomes toxic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very low vibration, very low frequency living, which sucks.
Yeah.
On the flip side of the wall, the overly like defensive boundary is the boundarylessness, right? When a person has zero boundaries and they're going to let anything in, right? And it
Yeah.
feels like everything is happening to you and you're just taking on things that you're not recognizing maybe that your boundaries are even being violated because you don't know you even have the boundaries if you don't know your limits. Or it could be a failure, or it could be that you recognize it, but you just can't say no because you haven't learned it and there's a lot of fear around it.
Yeah.
Like I was remembering as I was thinking about this topic, when I was a little girl, I did not have any boundaries in the sense that I didn't think I could say no to anybody. Like if somebody wanted to borrow my glue or take a marker off my desk or something like that,
Yeah.
like healthy kids will be like, oh, that's my marker, you can use it when I'm done or something, or can I use your glue? Like if I was in the middle of using something and somebody wanted it, I would feel like I would just have to give it to. I mean, I just literally could not say no. And it was, what was I so afraid of? And I was remembering, well, I think that it's not that I didn't know how to use the word no. And I at the time I remember thinking, I wish I could have just said, I'm using it. Can you, let's get you a different one or something. I just wanted to be able to say no really bad, because I knew at that time even other kids are able to say that, and nothing bad is happening to them.
Exactly.
And I think that it was really, I didn't feel safe. I think that I felt like the love of my parents would be severed if I said no, that I had guilt around saying no, that somebody was going to be hurt if I said no. And so it feels like fear, and you don't even know why, but it could be some kind of primal fear of losing connection, which as a kid you feel like is survival, right? And if we haven't dealt with that in adult relationships, sometimes it will feel like it's a matter of survival.
Yeah, and unfortunately,
like I just can't do it. Something bad will happen, even though intellectually you know nothing bad is really going to happen.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you begin what we term that codependent behavior, because rather than really relying on your input, how you feel, you're basing your perceptions and your decisions on what somebody else is thinking about you.
Exactly. Exactly, and prioritizing that.
Yeah,
and
that's so it's very empowering. Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that. Codependency is one of the problems we're going to talk about. But before we get into the problems, I want to just mention this concept of boundaries. If we think of it, I think this is a really helpful way of thinking about it. When we think of our body as being healthy, we have immune systems to keep us healthy, right? To fight off germs or toxins or foreign bodies. The cell has to know what is foreign and what is itself. What is me, what is itself, and what is something that doesn't belong here.
Yeah.
And then determining, do I let this in or do I not let this in? You can't make that decision unless you know what you are.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? What the essence of who you are is.
Yeah.
And so if you have an autoimmune disorder because you're misfiring and attacking things that's actually who you are, that shouldn't be attacked, or if you have a weak immune system where you're just letting everything in, right, not fighting anything within yourself, both of those are examples of health problems that we have physiologically. And if we just think about that metaphorically with a relationship, if we're not healthy, if we don't know who we are, we don't have that sense of like, this is me and this is not me, if we don't know that and have the ability to actually read those cues and say yes or no to things coming in, then we won't be able to have a healthy relationship.
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely. That's a great example.
Yeah, it's a really great metaphor because it's predicated on the idea that you first have to have that self-awareness. Most people don't think of that. They're just like, well, I just have to learn how to say no. But it's just not that simple, right? There's a lot of like deep inner work sometimes that's required to figure out, well, who am I in the first place? What are my limits? What are my lines? What are my bottom lines? What are my deal breakers? We might not know that. So how can we enforce that if we don't know that? That's, I think, the main thing to keep in mind.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the problems that we see in talking to people every day, both clients and just people in the group and just friends and family. And we see this all the time too, right? What are some of the biggest problems that come from poor boundaries or blurry boundaries?
Oh, the main one is the blame game.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
We all do it.
Holding people responsible for our own stuff, right?
Yeah, totally.
Definitely.
I feel bad inside and I'm going to make it about you. That's crossing the line between me and you if I'm making you responsible. If I'm blaming you, I'm automatically crossing a boundary, right?
Yeah. A big way that it shows up, and probably the most prevalent way that it shows up that I've seen, is, and a lot of times it's the woman, sometimes it's the man, but, we'll just say the woman goes to the man to emotionally connect, to bring up an issue that she wants to talk about and work through and solve. And the man or the husband, a lot of times will feel like he's being attacked. So instead of like being a gentleman and just listening and making her feel understood and heard and felt, he feels like he's being attacked, and he goes right into attack mode, and then starts blaming her for even bringing up the topic. Again, this goes both ways, but I'm just using this as the example because it's the most common.
The problem, then you are the problem.
Right.
Well, I want to make a distinction there. I think that's a really good point, is that there's blame, and then there's the false perception of blame. If we are truly criticizing someone and saying, you made me feel this way, if we're not owning our own reactions, our own, there's a way to bring stuff up to people, right? Where it's like, hey, when you said this, this is how I interpreted it, this is how I felt, right? That's bringing something up in a non-blaming way, or making a request. That's not the same thing as blaming. Blame is where you're like actually saying it's your fault. I'm overweight because you don't like it when I work out, or I don't have enough of a social life because you don't like it when I go hang out with my friends. It's not taking responsibility for your own choices. Like, I could just tell you wouldn't like it if I went to the gym. I could just tell you wanted me home, so I stayed home. And so now you're going to blame that person for your own health choices. Does that make sense? That's just
yeah.
Definitely.
But then there's, on the flip side, when somebody's not blaming you, but you're defensive, you're falsely perceiving being blamed and thinking that what they're bringing up, they're just sharing something about themselves and what they need, and you're hearing it as, oh, I've done something. I'm the bad guy. I'm being attacked. This person is saying that I've done something wrong. That's also a poor boundary too, because you're imagining that it's somehow about you, and this person really is just trying to be heard and share who they are with you and what they need. They might not even think
exactly
at all. They just want you to understand them and recognize, hey, I might need more in this situation. You didn't know that. How would you know? So I'm just telling you. No harm done. It's just a matter of communicating, right? So that's a really great distinction, I think, to make, is that we do sometimes, I know I still sometimes hear things as like, oh, if my husband's feeling that way, what did I do? Is there something about, is this about me? That, do you find this a lot, that one of the biggest questions we get in confusion when people are in crisis is this me? Is this just all me? I can't tell what's real anymore. Like, I can't tell what's my stuff and what's their stuff. If you ever feel confused, like, am I reading too much into this? That might be also a boundary thing.
Right. Making it about you when it's not about you. I think Ned might be, I don't know if he's not in here or if he's in the gallery or what.
It looks like he froze. He's frozen up. Can you hear us, Ned? Oh, I'm going to bring him back in. Hang on.
Okay.
He'll be right back in.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Okay. But no, I like that distinction and that nuance between blame and then the false perception of blame. Yeah.
And that's where, and that false perception of blame, when there isn't actually any blame being wielded, I think
defensiveness.
Yes, exactly. I think that kind of leads into codependency a little bit as well, because and codependency is also just a classic, dysfunctional relationship dynamic that you get as a result of poor boundaries. It's the idea that whatever the feelings of my partner, the experiences of my partner, are my responsibility.
Yeah.
So in other words, if they're having a bad day, I'm having a bad day.
Yeah.
How can I need to fix it because I can't be okay if they're having a bad day.
Yeah.
So now it feels like it's on me somehow.
Right.
Either because they're making us feel that way, because they believe it's our fault, or because maybe they're just like, they're very introverted on a given evening and they're just in their own head, or maybe they just need some time to themselves. And their partner is like feeling like, well, if they're stewing over work-related issues, or if they're having a moment of irritability or something like that, then that's something that makes me feel like I'm not okay. I have to make sure that they're okay and connected at all times in order for me to feel okay. Don't you see that happening all the time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually, I was going to say, Kelly and I have been married almost 9 years, and, when initially in the first part of the relationship, I was guilty. I was that person who was, taking on the false perception of blame, because she would just want to talk about something, or just share feelings around something, and my inability to be able to hear her where she was would create a lot of arguments, because I just felt like attacking me, and I was taking that on, and it was just because I was in this whole space of just not being able to hear her, not being able to support her where she was, not being able to connect with her, and actually just listen to her and go, oh yeah, we can work on that. That's not a problem. I don't even mind working on that. Or actually, I want to work on that with you. But I find that with a lot
or
of
just I'm so glad that you shared that with me, because now I have a better understanding
exactly
of who you are and what you need, because you're talking about you, not me.
It creates a lot of free flow in the dialogue at that point, when you begin to, actually stop looking at things that way, and actually just kind of owning your feelings around it also. When you just say, hey, I felt this way during that process too, so let's talk about that.
Another
so
yeah,
really
sorry, that was so good.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say another dynamic that I see a good bit are especially these women who've almost taken on this martyr victim role in the marriage, and they just give so much, and they do so much, and they love so much, and they just don't understand why everyone treats them just so wrong and so bad. And
yeah, like if they're
I'm miserable, I'm unhappy, and I am sick a lot, and it's because nobody loves me, everybody hates me, and it's everyone else's fault. It's
I
their
do so
fault
much for everybody else, and nobody does anything for me.
Yeah.
And not owning that they chose that.
Exactly.
They might be doing it without even being asked.
Exactly.
And expecting other people to do the same for them, when that might not have been their choice. And it was your choice, and you have to own that that's your choice. Like that, I see that a lot. That's a great point. And that leads right into resentment. Now, you had brought up that resentment can actually be, something that leads into bad boundaries. And I think that's true, but I also think that bad boundaries then plays right back into resentment, because if you are constantly agreeing to things that you don't really want to do, overextending yourself for others, but you're doing it from a place of resentment and bitterness because they're not reciprocating, and you're expecting them to make those same choices or whatever, and then you're going to just feel really resentful, and you're going to feel like your life isn't the way you want it to be because of your spouse.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It makes it very we go back to blame.
I shared a meme on Facebook last week, and it's this guy who's like, oops, is Ned talking? Can you hear him, Monika?
No, it's just a delay. It's a delay. You can see his mouth moving, but he's not talking right now.
I love the internet. Well, what I was going to say is there's this meme on Facebook that was really funny that I shared this past week, and it's this dude, and he's in the middle of this crowd, and he's got like this weird look on his face, like, and it's like that moment you realize that you created this whole
I saw that.
You created this whole reality, my dear. You, my dear one, have created all of this. No one to blame, right? You have to own it.
So don't resent people. Just get better boundaries. It's the same idea where it's like, with parenting, don't get mad, just get control. Getting angry is just a sign that you're not in control. In the same way, being resentment is just a sign that you're not honoring your own boundaries. And that's a hard one. That's a hard one for a lot of people.
That is a hard one.
Right? To be able to say, yeah, I did give more in those ways, but I didn't have to. And it was a choice I made because of who I am. And not everybody has to do it the way that I do it. That's what having good boundaries is being okay with somebody else doing it a different way and not taking it personally.
Yeah.
That reminds me too, there's another really big thing that comes up, and this is one of the things I had written down too, is there's this need to be right. And we don't tend to think of this as a boundary thing. But the idea that we have to be right, we're in a power struggle with our partner, or we need to try to convince them of our position, because we fear that if they don't see it the way that we see it, then we're not going to be connected, or that we can't work together. Or if they don't see it the way we see it, that we're wrong, or we make some kind of negative meaning about it. And we don't just allow them to just have their own feelings and reactions that are separate from ours. And we really just fight them and fight them and fight them to try to, and we can't even move past it unless, for example, if somebody brings up something, and not even just like a politics issue or a parenting issue, but like, if your spouse brings up something where they're feeling sad because there's not more affection, and they're bringing that up, like, I wish there was more affection, and you're feeling like, no, there is enough affection, and you're trying to convince them of your viewpoint, the rightness of your position. And if they think that way, then they're going to feel that way. You don't want them to feel that way, because you think if they feel that way, it means something about you in the relationship, so that you want to change the way they think and feel. Trying to convince your spouse is really a bad boundary.
Yeah, totally.
As separate from your own.
Yeah.
And just, if a lot of fights could just be avoided, if people could just say,
totally,
okay, I accept exactly how you feel and what you're thinking, even though it's not my position. Now, how can we work together? Let's not waste any time arguing about that. Right?
It takes me back to that Terry Real quote that I love so much, in his teachings, where he talks about, reality, right? Like, there's no such thing as objective reality in relationship. There's your reality and there's your reality, and both of them are okay. Don't make them wrong. Let them be. Let the person who has that reality sit with that reality and try to understand where they're coming from, and then work through it together. But
yes,
there's two subjective realities, folks. There's not one objective reality. So there's no sense in going back and forth between each other, trying to convince the other one that yours is the right one.
Yeah, and that is a huge boundary thing. If you can get to that place, you will have that clear line between you. It's not a threat. It's not a division. It's not keeping you from being connected. And in fact, it's going to allow you to have greater connection.
Exactly.
Totally.
So that is one of the things I wanted to make sure to bring up. The other thing too, you guys, let's talk about unbridled self-expression, which I love this expression. This is another Terry realism.
Realism.
What do you, I mean, how I hear unbridled self-expression is you're just dumping onto someone else. It's like, it's not the same thing as like blame, and it's not the same thing as verbal abuse, but it's just a lot of dumping and feeling like you can take all your stuff and emotional vomit, put it on their yard, just to vent and free yourself, and not recognizing that energetically they have to absorb all of that.
Right.
Yeah. I look at unbridled self-expression almost like a vent session.
Yeah.
It's like, you know what? I'm going to tell you all the things I have a problem with about you. And it just opens up that can of worms, and which is very counterproductive in terms of really
right,
figuring out what's wrong, and really establishing.
Well, and because that you don't want to pile things onto each other, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Terry talks about it in terms of like the difference between the unbridled self-expression is the difference between emoting your feelings, like, or not even, but like becoming your feelings, like you become the feeling, right? And then it's like bleh, right?
Yeah.
Energetically,
you're not recognizing, there's not that separation between you and the feeling.
Right. So it's like you becoming your feelings versus you communicating your feelings, right?
That's a great way of putting it. I love that distinction. I've never heard that before. That is so true, because it's able to say, I'm recognizing that I'm having this feeling and I'm going to share this with you. Whereas unbridled self-expression is just like dumping and going on and on and on and asking rhetorical questions like, how could you do this? Or going on and on about all the different ways in which you feel bad about something. So like, it's not just saying, hey, I had a reaction to this. It's, how could you do that to me? Which is not necessarily overtly a criticism. but it's sort of accusing, and it's just, and then it's like, this is what you're doing to me. This is how I feel. Now it's ruined my day, blah, 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 and going on and on about all the negative emotions about how this person made me feel.
Right. You made me feel that way.
Yeah.
That's another big one, right?
Yeah.
Instead of
owning, this is the way I feel, right?
Mm-hmm. And there's more than one way to feel about this same thing.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
It's not always inevitable.
Exactly.
On some level, we have to own our filters that lead to those feelings.
That's a whole other
how we
topic.
communicate that stuff. But at least just the awareness of knowing. And when we stop having unbridled self-expression, and when we stop blaming others, then, and we resist the urge to do that, we end up clarifying our own boundaries for ourselves. So that if we don't know our own boundaries, that's one of the best ways you can learn them. Stop blaming and notice what comes up for you. Start owning, oh my gosh, this is my fear. This is my want. This is my desire. This is my limit.
Right.
You won't know that unless you stop blaming.
Right. And it's so important, like you just said, Monika, to really observe yourself in these moments when you get triggered and you feel like you just want to spew, right? Like, really stop. Give yourself a moment before you spew and you start to notice, what are the nuances of this? What is this coming from? Like, because a lot of times when we get triggered, we're reacting and we're responding from stuff that happened way back when we were 3.
Right.
And what's going on right now in the moment is not really what this is all about, right?
Exactly.
So it's really important that you start to pay attention to and give some time and consideration to what really is coming up for you in these moments.
Yeah, right.
I think Ned disappeared again.
Yeah, he'll hop back on again, and I'll add him. I'll bring
Okay.
him in. When I see him come in, I'll bring him back into the studio area. I think there was an echo, and he wanted to hop off and on.
Okay.
That's what I think. So let's see. We've talked about codependency, resentment, needing to be right, false perception of blame and blame, unbridled self-expression, and the final one is enmeshing the children into our adult problems. Let's talk about that. What do you see happening with this? How does this show up in your experience?
Hold on one second, because when you were talking, some of it muted, or not muted, you went out. Okay.
Oh.
Okay. Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was just saying, I kind of covered what we talked about in terms of the problem areas that come from poor boundaries. But the one we haven't talked about yet is enmeshing the children into our adult problems. How do you see that showing up?
Well, unfortunately, you see it come up a lot when parents are, in these really toxic dynamics in their marriage, and they're really including the children in terms of like looking to the children for emotional support, which is a form of psychological incest. And I hate that word, but that's really what it is. When you're looking to children to make yourself feel better, to get emotional support, even if it's in an energetic way, it's really unhealthy for the children. And there are some really long-term psychological damage that happens, when that occurs. So that, and then, and another example is when, a couple is, having a hard time, they're going through stuff, and a parent will share with the children very specific details about what's going on in the marriage, in the relationship.
Right. Yeah. Or if there's an
calling out the other parent in front of the kids.
Right.
Or something specific.
Yep. Revealing something about the other partner to the kid that parent wouldn't have wanted revealed is also like a messed up boundary. And enmeshment, just to be clear, is not when we're there for our kids and having that emotional intimacy. It's when we want them to be there for us.
Right. And around adult topics.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
So that's another example of what goes wrong when we don't have clear boundaries, and that the kids actually end up, it becomes a legacy. When we don't get our boundaries in place, that ends up becoming a generational thing, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So we have to really think clearly about, if we can get our boundaries in place, that is going to have such, like, talk about bang for your buck. That is probably the single biggest thing you can do to improve your relationship in many different ways, eliminate a lot of problems, and then that becomes something that gets modeled to the kids. And then they can go forth with better boundaries that they inherited from you, where it doesn't become this thing that keeps getting passed from generation to generation.
Right.
It's really a gift of health that you can give to your children. It's
absolutely
reducing depression and anxiety, because a lot of times anxiety is so much just about feeling responsible for things that are not in your control, but you feel responsible. That anxious alpha thing, like, that is something we can protect our children from by modeling healthy boundaries.
Right.
Let's talk about that. And it looks like Ned never came back, but we should talk about let's just move into, I kind of want to talk about, I want to leave you guys today with something tangible that you can do to start thinking about how to get more clear with your boundaries. Hopefully this has been food for thought in your own relationship. The main thing you guys want to do, and chime in, Kelly, for
totally.
You're going to want to recognize, first of all, that when you're a separate whole person with clear lines between you and your partner, you're actually much stronger as a couple. It's not putting a wall between you. It really is actually strengthening you and making you healthier. That's the whole idea of interdependence versus codependence. And you each have something separate and unique to bring to the mix. Each of you has your own point of view, your own needs, your own creative solutions. And the more that you can incorporate each person fully with a clear line between the two of you, the more resources you have, the more richness you have in your relationship. So keep that in mind. Also, remember, this is so important, that strong boundaries does not equal holding up a distance. A lot of times we think of as a boundary as something that divides us, right? In the sense that it brings us farther apart. But it actually, when you have secure boundaries, you are much more generous. You are much more capable of a deeper connection, because it's like, if you can picture a fence, it's like a gate with a fence that you can open at any time and then close it again. And when you have that kind of confidence of closing and opening the gate, and you're in control of that gate, you're going to be far more generous, because you're not afraid of losing your own ground. You're not afraid of losing yourself. You're not operating from a place of resentment. You actually are much more loving. If you think about the most loving people in the world, the most confident, loving, strong people, the most giving people,
boundaries
that are healthy, they have great boundaries. I know.
Yeah.
It's not a way of saying no to someone. That's where it starts, but that's not where it ends.
Right.
So you have to decide to take full responsibility for your own interpretations, your own feelings, your own experiences. Take responsibility for that and everything on your side of the street. Start there, right? Wouldn't you say, Kelly, that's the biggest starting point?
Yeah. It's definitely owning your stuff and knowing that boundaries are the most loving, right, gift that you can give yourself and your marriage and your kids, right?
Yes.
And it
It's
always starts with you.
radical self-love to have to hold your boundaries.
Totally.
But it's not self-love at the expense of everything else in your ecosystem. And
right. It's the total opposite.
It
So
ends
it's
up
like
being
we're
more
busting
loving.
the myth that boundaries are
Selfish.
that separate, we're busting the myth that boundaries are bad, or that you're not a good wife if you have boundaries with your husband or your friends or your family. That's all BS. It's the most loving thing that you can do to have boundaries with yourself first and with the people in your life. And I say no to a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff, a lot.
Well, saying no is a really big part of getting stronger with all the things you are saying yes to.
Yeah.
When you can say no to things, the things you are putting your energies into actually get better and stronger, and a greater source of whatever it is that you're trying to build in your life. So
yeah,
totally. You guys have to do the belief work to overhaul these bad boundaries. If you are struggling with bad boundaries, if you're having anger problems, if you feel resentful, if you feel victimized, look at what you have not honored within yourself Look at where you had a hard time holding your own boundaries. And if there's any negative beliefs that you're holding that are getting in the way of saying no, fears or history of trauma might play into that. Look at that and recognize that's not serving you anymore.
Right.
And start really practicing on small stakes things.
Yeah.
And then work your way up to some bigger stakes things. But once you internalize new beliefs that support those boundaries, it's going to be so much easier.
Totally.
So if you guys want to get some support around this, you can book a call. I will put a link in the comments below. You will talk to either myself or Kelly or Ned. And the purpose of this call really is for you if you're married and you love each other and you really want to stay together, but you're stuck in some really bad patterns and relationship dynamics that you want to get out of. You want to stop fighting, you want to have less conflict, you want to feel the love again, you want to bring the intimacy back, and you're looking for support. Definitely book a call with us so we can get a better understanding of what your unique situation is, identify some of the barriers, help you with understanding and getting clear on the boundary stuff, what's yours, what's not yours, and what would actually have to happen in your case. Because it's actually a really deep
very
topic. Like, so there's so much involved in boundaries, and if you might be dealing with protective boundary issues, whereas somebody else is dealing with containing boundary issues. So we can help you kind of really sort out which kind of boundaries you are needing to improve on,
right.
And how you can support others in holding those as well.
Totally.
Caveat that this is not for you if you're in an abusive relationship, okay? If you're afraid of your partner, if there's ever been a history of physical violence, if there's financial control and abuse, we really can't help you. Definitely email me though, and I will try to connect you with some resources in your area. But what we do and what we teach, because if you're in an abusive relationship, setting boundaries is only going to make it worse. Like, you're not safe setting boundaries in an abusive relationship. So the call would not be for you in that situation.
Right.
Also, if your partner has an acute active addiction, or if they're actively involved with another person outside of the marriage and have no interest in ending that relationship, then that's not something, unfortunately, we can help right now.
Yeah. But if you are in love, you're together, and you are stuck, and you want to stay married, but you can't stay like the way it's going right now, and you want to get through the stuckness and move through these issues from now on with ease, definitely book a call, because that's what we specialize in.
Yes. Amen. All right. I look forward to your comments and questions below. We will make sure to answer those. It looks like there were actually some comments perhaps that came up during our talk, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to respond to those in real time. But I will
totally go back and answer. Yeah.
We'll comment on that. Yeah, let's keep the conversation going. This is not an easy topic to get our heads around sometimes. So please do feel free to ask any questions that you have, and I look forward to getting those. And we look forward to seeing you next time. We have another really wonderful topic for next Thursday.
Yes. Bye, guys.
Bye. Have a good weekend.